All right, please turn in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 25. Tonight we will cover chapters 25 and 26. As we are again in a section of 3 chapters, we've seen this on a number of occasions in the book of Samuel. We are at the second and third chapters tonight of a 3-chapter section where we see David responding to trouble in his life. In chapter 24, David found Saul in the cave in En-gedi, and David spared his life. God put Saul right in front of David, and David had an opportunity to kill the man who for years now had been hunting David with the purpose of killing him. And David wisely did not. He took a piece of Saul's garment for proof. There most likely was a bit more than just proof in that he was cutting off the hem of the king's robe, showing something of a portion of the kingdom being taken from Saul. We're going to see again tonight 2 other instances where David has difficulty with people. One will be with a man named Nabal, and David's response is a response from anger and violence, and he is on his way to kill him when God intervenes. Otherwise, David possibly would never have been the king had he killed Nabal, because he would have been guilty of innocent blood. And then in chapter 26, again, David will have an opportunity to kill Saul, and once again, he will defer to the Lord in the Lord's plan. And we see David maturing as a man and as God's anointed to become the greatest king in Israel, and quite possibly the greatest king to ever live. So with that, can we get a volunteer? Let's see, we are going to have to read quite a bit. Let's just start out with verses 1 through 13. The narrative is fairly long in this, but let's start out with 1 through 13. Can we get a volunteer for that? Yeah?
Sure. Now Samuel died. Stinky way to start. And all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and we buried him in the house of Ramah. Then David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran, and there was a man in Moab whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Celebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing the sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David." When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David. And then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat and have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where?" So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, every man strap on a sword, and every man to them strapped on a sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage.
The baggage.
The baggage.
Thank you.
My bad.
So, we start off with the death of Samuel, and it almost seems just like a footnote.
Yeah.
Samuel is a great prophet of the nation, and he gets, in his death, he gets, what, 2 sentences? Because, primarily, the book, although it's titled Samuel, it's not about Samuel. It's about the kingship and the change that the nation made from being this loose conglomerate of tribes to being a unified nation tied together through a king. So Samuel dies, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. It was not common to bury on their own property, generally, or at least not at their house, like it says here. But they did with Samuel. And I'm certain that there would have been a time period of mourning. What this does for David is he no longer has Samuel as a helper in the struggle with Saul. At least in the past, Saul wouldn't necessarily listen to Samuel, but David could gain insights and encouragement from Samuel, and that is gone. So the one thing that these 2 men had in common was that they had both been anointed by Samuel, and now that's gone. So it seems as if that bit of protection, so to speak, has been taken away. And then down toward the end of verse 1, it says, David rose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And so most of the commentators that I read believe that the reason he went even further away, further south, is because of the death of Samuel. He feels that Saul now will say, I have zero restraint to hold me back. I'm getting this man. And verse 2 explains there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. So during the time of sheep shearing, it's a festive time. It's like we saw in the book of Ruth during the time of the harvest. Whenever there's sheep shearing, whenever there's the harvest, the people don't necessarily do it by themselves. Right? A man with 3,000 sheep obviously isn't doing it himself, but his people aren't necessarily the only ones there doing it. The communities would gather together and have a big event with these things. And so it's a festive time in that portion of Palestine, and everybody's going to be partying it up. And Nabal has the ability to bless people. He's a very wealthy man. So verse 3 says, now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. Oftentimes the names are important. Nabal means fool. Now it's doubtful that his mother named him fool. There is a name that is very close to Nabal in Hebrew. That's possibly what his original name was, but chances are people took that and just did a little wordplay because the man was foolish in how he dealt with things. And so not necessarily going to call him Nabal to his face, but even his wife calls him Nabal. His wife's name is Abigail. And Abigail means the joy of the father, meaning her father. So her character plays that out, that matched her name. She's a woman of integrity, a woman of discerning wisdom, and a woman of great physical beauty. And then it says, the woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. So there is a tribe of Caleb in the area, and he certainly could have been from that tribe, but that also lends itself to a play on words, because the name Caleb has a specific meaning. Does anybody know what that meaning is? Caleb means dog. So it could have been a play on words to say he's a dog. Okay, his behavior is more animalistic than human. David heard, verse 4, in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say, peace to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now, your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time. They were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. So David sends 10 guys over to him with a very polite request. However, David has a right to his request. David's men have been guarding Nabal's sheep and Nabal's concerns, although it apparently unasked for, they've done this. And David is not demanding what he has a right to, he's simply asking. So we don't want to look at this as like a mafia thug coming up and saying, if you want to do business here and be protected from the bad guys, you got to pay up. This is a cultural thing, and it was very common that when these shepherds would be out in the fields, that they're very vulnerable. And David has 600 men. He simply says, you know what? Nobody's touching these guys. David's a shepherd. He has a heart for these men, and he has a heart for the sheep. And his men provide protection, and David goes to a man who's very, very wealthy and could have given enough provision for these guys to have a nice feast and would never have noticed it. But we see Nabal's character in his response. So verse 9 says, David's men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David. So chances are they didn't speak directly to Nabal. They spoke to one of his people. They went and told him what David was requesting, and the men waited for the answer, and the answer comes back, who's David? Who is this guy? Where's he from? He knows exactly who he is. We can tell by the words that he has to say. He's saying that in a derogatory way. He says, who is this son of Jesse? And then he goes on to say, there are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. So it appears that Nabal is well aware of the struggle between Saul and David, and most likely the entire community is. It's been some years. The one thing we don't have is timestamps throughout the book of Samuel to say, it's been 10 years. We do know that David ran from Saul for roughly 15 years. So we see an event happening in En-Gedi, and now we see this event happening at Nabal, and when they're back to back, we tend to think these are a couple of weeks away. These things could be 5 years away or more. But the writer doesn't have purpose in the other events that happened. He's showing us specific things from the history to show us how David becomes the king, and how David further is matured into a man who's worthy to be the king. So Nabal responds very sarcastically and showing that he is obviously on the side of King Saul. Verse 11, he says, "Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I don't know where?" And again, it's a derogatory statement towards him. Maybe we could read that as men who come from who knows where.
That's what my verse says.
Right? Yeah, that's the gist of it. Notice David's men take no action with Nabal. Verse 12, David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. Verse 13, David said to his men, "Every man strap on his sword," and every one of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. So a couple of things we learn here. Although David was very patient and respectful in his dealing with Saul, that is not necessarily his normal way. When somebody simply disrespects him, David is ready to kill him. He's not going to, he didn't say, you know what, we're just going to go and get this stuff. No, we're going to go and kill these guys. That, I believe, would have disqualified David as being king over Israel. Further, we had learned earlier in the book that King Saul and Jonathan were the only one that had iron swords. That the rest of the men had various different implements. It doesn't necessarily say that these are iron swords, but we can assume that they are. So some years have passed since that battle with Goliath, and it appears now that Israel now has Iron Age technology, and they are able to build these types of weapons. Everybody seems to have them now. So David's young men, 400 men, David musters. Kind of an overreaction, very hot-headed, and about to take a very tragic turn. But God, the hand of God is upon this man, and he will protect him. Verse 14. Let's see, can we get somebody to read from verse 14? Where's that break? Through 31. Actually, we're going to need that through 35. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll do it.
14 through 35.
Okay. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the field near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time. We were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man, no one can talk to him. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 sheaves of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisin, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them onto a donkey. Then she told her servant, Go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David. May God deal with David, be ever so severe, if by morning I leave alone and leave one I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed before David with her face on the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my Lord sent. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming by my Lord be like Nabal, and let his gift which your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant presumption. The Lord God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoings will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies will be hurled away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have his conscience on staggering burdens of needless bloodshed, or having avenged himself. And when the Lord God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. David said to Abigail, "Praise to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent me today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, no, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Okay, then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words granted. And granted your request."
Thank you. Wow. The value of a wise woman.
Amen.
Carol and I are in the Proverbs right now in our devotions, and just within the last couple of days, we came across the one that says, "A wise woman builds up her house, but a foolish one tears it down with her own hands." And we have view of both of those taking place right now with people that we know. We know some very wise women who are doing well and building up their homes and their families, and we see others who, through their own actions and words, are tearing their families apart, and it's a shame. It really is. But David has a very wise woman, and this is the hand of God. We've called this in the past, the providence of God. And I believe I said this last week, it's the hand of God in the glove of circumstance. I heard that quote from somebody, and I thought, I don't know a better definition of providence. The hand of God in the glove of circumstance. It's in the everyday that God moves and does these things. He's the master multitasker, because he can be working in all of our lives at the same time, weaving this great tapestry together and building his kingdom for the future. All right, so verse 14. David's on his way, 400 men, fuming in anger and about to murder Nabal. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the fields as long as we were with them. They were a wall to us, both night and by day, and all the while we were with them, keeping the sheep. Now therefore, know this and consider what you should do, for harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a worthless man, no one can speak to him." First off, notice that they don't have to explain who David is. David's name is known. Abigail seems to know exactly who David is, and that he has the power to do something about her husband Nabal. And these messengers seem to know that as well, and they relay to her that David and his men have been good to us. And in that, I believe they are justifying David's request for the food. These guys have done well for us. There is no reason that Nabal should have acted in any way like the way he did when these guys came and requested a little bit of food from us. And chances are good that during this time that David's men were out there in the fields, they became friends with these shepherds. And the shepherds shared their food, and David's men protected them. So they had probably had a fairly decent relationship with most of Nabal's shepherds. And it says that they were a wall to us, both night and by day, all the while we were keeping with them, keeping the sheep. Or we were with them, keeping the sheep. So not only did David's men not take anything from Nabal's men, they protected them. Nobody else took anything either. They really did what was right before Nabal. And as David says, he returned him evil for good. Now therefore, they tell Abigail, know this and consider what you should do. You need to take action. We can't. You need to. For harm is determined against our master and against all his household. They understand what kind of response Nabal's response would garner from a man like David. They know he's not going to come and argue with Nabal over this. It seems to me that it would be, these guys knew Nabal's answer to David was going to result in their death. So harm is determined against our master and all his household, for he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. That term, a worthless man, remember when we were looking at early in the book, Eli's sons, there was this term, they were sons of Belial. It's the same thing here. It's like they're the sons of the devil. They have no, he's a worthless guy. Not that he has no value, but he has no good in him. Verse 18, then Abigail made haste. See, there's times to stop and pray, and there's times to take action. That's one of the things that we saw wrong with Saul. He was praying when it was clear what action he should have been taken, and he was taking action when it was clear that he should have been praying. Saul didn't get it. He wasn't necessarily an irreligious man. He just didn't seem to understand God and what was right for him to do. So she takes action. She says, made haste and took 200 loaves of bread and 2 skins of wine, and 5 sheep already prepared 5 seahs of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 100 clusters of figs, and laid them on donkeys. So 200 loaves of bread. David's got 600 men, so each man's going to get about a third of a loaf of bread. Okay, this isn't a week's provision. This is a meal, right? 2 wineskins is not 2 Boda bags, right? There's not enough wine for 2 guys. This is enough wine for each guy to have a cup. These wineskins are more than likely a full cattle, like an ox, the entire skin made into a wineskin. Okay. There were some numbers, but it didn't jive with me on how big they were. But know that this is a lot. It's not simply 2 glasses of wine.
No,
5 sheep, 5 seahs of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. And you may have different words there for clusters of raisins and cakes of figs. In the Hebrew, it simply says 100 of raisins, 200 of figs. It doesn't tell us the unit of measure, because as the people of the day, they would have clearly understood this, and oftentimes, different from our language, oftentimes they leave things out that people would know. Like early in the Hebrew language, during these times that this was written, they left off the vowels. That's one of the things we're going to look at when we study the Bible, that the early Hebrew only had consonants. It was up to the reader to supply the vowels. And they figured you knew what they were saying, and you would fill them in yourself. And they did. The problem is, we don't. Right? We're centuries and centuries away from that. So when we see things like that, they leave stuff out, it shouldn't bring doubt to us on the authenticity of the word. We are just in a vastly different culture. We do things entirely different. So all of this food she prepares, and then she says to her young men, she lays all this stuff out on donkeys, plural. She says, "Go on before me. Behold, I have come after you." So we see a similar event to this back in the days of the patriarchs, when Isaac is coming back from his time with Laban, and his brother Esau is coming to greet him, and he has 400 men. What does Isaac do? He sends a gift. But he sends a gift like this. One group of his family with gifts for him. And then after he gets that, when he's like opening up the last thing, here comes another group with more stuff, and another group with more stuff. Abigail is doing a similar thing. So we shouldn't picture you've got one train of guys going to David with this. No, there is a line of guys, and there's a gap in between. So there's going to be a gift, and David takes that and goes, okay, well, fine. And then the next one comes, and then the next one comes, and then the next one comes. And all this stuff is coming, and then at last comes Abigail. So it plays into the mind of the person receiving how great this gift is. Rather than, it's like at Christmas time, if the kids open up 15 things at once, or if you let this thing progress, over an hour or so, where everybody opens the first gift, and then everybody opens the second gift. It's a bigger thing for the kids. There's more expectation for them. It's a similar thing. So she tells them, "Go on ahead before me," in verse 19. "Behold, I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. That's part of her wisdom. Generally speaking, we would say, this is not good. Right? You need to be open and honest with each other. Except when you're married to Nabal. Right? If you're married to a violent man who's also known to be a drunkard, you may not want to share all the details of things. I'm just saying. As she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. So all of the gifts had already gotten there. Now she comes. And verse 21 says, "Now David had said, surely in vain have I guarded all this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed and that all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. So we don't know the distance between when David started out and now, but he is still fuming. He said when she got there, apparently he had just gotten done saying this, right? So this is going over and over, and it's like he's getting more angry the further he gets and the closer he gets to Nabal. And now Abigail comes. Oh, excuse me, we have his vow first. In verse 22, David makes a foolish vow. God do so to my enemy, God do so to the enemies of David and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. The other big translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, reads, not that God do so to the enemies of David, but God do so to David. And that's more than likely the way it was originally rendered. So God do so to me if I don't do this, right? But God's not going to hold him to that foolish vow. So verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. So she is at least David's equal at this time. She's the wife of a very wealthy man. And for her to dismount is a sign of respect. So she dismounts her donkey. That's the first sign of respect. But then she takes it to the ultimate and she bows face down to the ground before him. So she is showing ultimate respect to David, unlike her husband. She is undoing what her husband has done. She fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my Lord, may be the guilt. She is going to put David between a rock and a hard place. When she gets done speaking, David has no course of action other than to turn and go back. She is a very wise woman in the way she puts this together. Because what man with 400 men is going to attack a woman by herself? She's saying, all of this, all that Nabal has done, whatever you're going to do to him, I'll take the blame. Carry it out on me. David is hogtied, basically. Verse 25, let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord, whom you sent. So don't regard what Nabal said. And further, no, I didn't know. I didn't know they came and asked. Because if I would have known, they wouldn't have come back with that report. They would have come back with what you just received. And further notice that she calls David my Lord. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving, from saving with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. So now she brings in the name of the Lord, and she shows David, God sent me. God sent me to stop you from doing something stupid. Okay? He doesn't term it in that way, but that's exactly what's going on. The Lord has restrained you from blood guilt. Okay, that's a little bit more accurate translation than bloodshed, because it carries in it the concept of the guilt behind shedding innocent blood. Nabal is innocent of a penalty of death. He's not innocent completely, but he's innocent of something that would require his life. And David was ready to take his life. Verse 27, and now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Verse 28, please forgive the trespass of your servant. So she says with that, this gift is meant for all of your men. There's plenty of it there. And then this thing about forgiving the trespass, she's saying, please forgive me, but I'm not done talking yet. I got more to say. Okay? And here's the more. For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. Evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. So she's almost saying a word of prophecy here about David. Verse 29, if men rise up to pursue you and seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound up in the bundle of the living, in the care of the Lord your God. So she's pronouncing a blessing and further saying, God's got his hand on you. And there are those of us in the nation that see this. Everybody, it seems now, knows of the falling out between Saul and David, and the country is somewhat divided. Obviously, there are those that support Saul, and there are those that support David. Verse 30, and when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all that he has spoken. So there's reference there to Samuel's anointing concerning you, and he has appointed you prince over Israel. Prince over Israel in this respect means the king. My Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. That last term is a little bit difficult. David working salvation himself, meaning David is carrying out his own vengeance. He is not to be the one doing this. David needs to learn to trust God and to be patient, or to be patient and trust God, however that comes. This is a very difficult thing. He's very upset at what happened. He's been disrespected in a culture where respect is paramount. David has been slapped in the face, so to speak, but he is learning. You do not fly off the handle. You're the king. You need to act like a king. You need to seek advice. You need to be a man of patience and wisdom. If it's time to gather up your army and go, you'll certainly do that. But you're not going to do that in a breath like it happened here. And this shows David's humility, because one woman turns him around. And we all know, I assume anyway, we know at this time, in this culture, women were not given the respect that men were. Yet David gives her that respect. David is a type of Christ, meaning that David's actions shadow what Jesus' actions do. Jesus did not respond in violence. We've seen David with Saul before not responding in violence, and now this time he won't respond in violence. And further, we see David giving respect to people who were not respected during that in their culture. And if you take a look at where women today are still undervalued, it is in those countries where Christianity has a very, very small voice. And where women are honored and respected as equals are in the countries that have been shaped by Christianity. The Lord Jesus Christ is what changed that. And David is a type of Jesus. So finishing up verse 31, and when the Lord has dealt well with my servant, with my Lord, then remember your servant. So she says, when all this stuff's going to take place, I am sure that you're going to be the king, and when you are, remember I was good to you. It's going to come a whole lot quicker than either one of them had planned or thought. And David says to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to me this day. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you. You have kept me from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought, and said to her, "Go in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice, and I have granted your petition." So David admits there that he was going to wipe out all the men. And in the Hebrew, where he says there should not be one male, it's actually somewhat of a swear word, the way he says it. And I'm just going to leave that out. You can leave it to your imagination, the term he uses for men. So I'm going to go ahead and read this last section, and we'll finish up chapter 25. And Abigail said to Nabal, and Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. She told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So when Abigail returns, she's not going to keep this thing from her husband forever, but she wanted to be sure that she was able to give the gift to David. So she goes to tell her husband. She sees that he's partying it up with his guys. Now is not the time to say something. Right? We never want to confront a drunk. It's not worth our time to witness to somebody when they're stone drunk or they're high. Wait until they're sober and of a clear mind. Right? And she does that. So she holds it until the next day. And the next day when she tells these things, most likely from the results of what happened, Nabal had a stroke. And 10 days later, the Lord took his life. So verse 39, when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal." Man, this guy is ruthless. Oh, man. And has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil of Nabal on his own head. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to take you to him as his wife." And she arose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, "Behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." And Abigail hurried and rose and mounted a donkey, and her 5 young women attending her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. So Nabal's gone. David's like, he's praising God. And he's not praising God just because Nabal's gone. He's praising God because there was an intervention and he wasn't the one that took his life. And I think one of the reasons this happened so quickly is because the Lord wanted to show David, I got you. I got you on this, okay? You need to learn to allow me to act. I mean, if it would have been 5 years later, David may not have put the two together. But them happening one thing and then happening another like that, David can obviously see the hand of God in it. We don't always see the hand of God in our life, right? But that hindsight is 20/20. When we look back is when we see, aha, now I see what the Lord was doing. And now it mentioned, and then David says, this is one not to let get away. She's obviously a very wise woman and a woman of influence, but there's more to it than just that. She's a very wealthy woman. With this, with becoming her husband, David will acquire the property, all that Abigail has. He won't necessarily acquire the plot of land. But all those animals are now David's. And he is married to a wealthy and influential woman in Hebron, the area. Just a second. And when David first becomes king, he's first king in Hebron. So there's some political stuff that he benefits from as well. Cindy?
I was just gonna ask, why is it back then it was allowable for a man to have many wives? Now it's not?
Yeah.
In this country.
The Lord never said it was okay. The Lord we never read of it being okay, and we really never read of it working out well for the men. They just did it.
No comment.
Annie?
I think we just got smarter. I mean, if you literally read Proverbs and Psalms and all that, I mean, you hear Solomon and David, all they do is complain about having all these wives.
Yeah.
So,
It just, you never read that there was, the household worked well. There's always turmoil there. And now it goes down to verse 43 says, David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and both of them became his wives. So, and it also mentions his first wife, Michal, the daughter of Saul, and that she had been taken from David and given to Palti, the son of Laish, who was in Galim. But notice, David never divorces her. He never recognizes that she is not his wife. He keeps a hold of her. Turn this on.
So that means he had 3 wives then?
Oh, he does more than that.
Unless she has 5 ladies.
they have like wives, concubines.
Well, that doesn't necessarily mean they're all gonna be his concubines. But certainly, these men in this age practice polygamy. And we never read that the Lord says, I'm fine with it. We never do. So, but in the New Testament, it's very clear. Don't be doing that stuff. It's not good for you, and it's not good for the woman. All right, we have about 8 seconds to do chapter 26. No, not quite. I'm going to go ahead and read through this myself, just to get us through it. And then we'll walk back through it. Now, this is going to be somewhat parallel to chapter 24. There are quite a few similarities, but there's significant differences as well. So chapter 26, then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hachilah, which is on the east of Jeshimon? So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. But David remained in the wilderness when he saw that Saul had come after him into the wilderness. David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed come. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw that the place where Saul lay, with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was laying within the encampment while the army was encamped around him. So again, we hear of the Ziphites. The Ziphites are obviously on Saul's side. They're the ones that ratted David out before, right? So they're ratting him out again. Obviously, there's some kind of a payoff to them. There's some benefit to them, at least that they're looking for from Saul. So they come to Saul at Gibeah. And remember, Gibeah at this time was called Gibeah of Saul, because that's Saul's home. And they said, David's over here. So Saul arose and he went down to the wilderness of Ziph. And he's once again, he brings those 3,000 men. He is ready to chase after David. And he brings his elite forces with him into the wilderness of Ziph. Now, Saul, verse 3, it says, Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. Okay, so him and his 3,000 men are over here. David is further into the wilderness. David takes action this time. He doesn't wait for Saul to come and find him. David says, how far out is he? So he sends spies to see exactly where he is. They come back with a report. And so we see that David then himself goes out to the place, and David sees them. He can see where the camp is and the arrangement in which they're sleeping. So it's if there's 3,000 men, and right in the middle is the king. And right next to the king is Abner, the commander of the 3,000 men. So you would think there's no way anybody's ever going to get to Saul but God. Verse 6, then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, yeah, that's an easy one, who will go down with me into the camp to Saul? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. Then Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said, as the Lord lives, look at this now, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now, take his spear that is at his head and the jar of water. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. See, these guys are stealth, but you're not going to be stealth enough to sneak in between 3,000 men and snatch the king.
And have a conversation while you're standing over the dude.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Even if you are whispering.
Yeah.
When God put these guys in a deep sleep. And we see in the Bible, there have been a number of times where God put men into a deep sleep. The first time he did it, he took a man's rib.
Yeah.
Turned out really good, huh?
All right. Still hurting from it down there.
Oh, man. I'm even out. No. So, verse 6, David's got two guys. He's got 600 men with him, but there's only two that he considers for this mission. And one of them is a foreigner, Ahimelech the Hittite. The other is Joab's brother, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah. Now, a couple of things. Joab will become David's commander. As Abner is to Saul, Joab will be to David going forward. But Joab's brother is the one wants to go with him. And it says there that he is the son of Zeruiah. We're not familiar with names, so we don't recognize that as a female name. But that is David's sister. So apparently her husband had died, otherwise it would have mentioned the father's name instead of the mother. And so he says, who will go down? Not will you, but which one of you two are going to do this? Because David's set to do it, and they're not going to let him go alone. Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul? He doesn't tell what his purpose is. He just says, who's going to go with me down there? And Abishai says, I'm your guy. I'll go. I will go down with you, Abishai tells him in verse 7. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul, sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. Remember, we mentioned on a number of occasions that that spear is the symbol of his kingship. And David now is going to leave with it. Remember before he cut off a part of that king's robe? Now he takes the spear, and it speaks to Saul when he does that. Where are we at here? Then Abishai says to, verse 8, Abishai says to David, God has given your enemy into your hands this day. Now please, because he probably was there in the cave in Engedi, let me pin him to the earth with one stroke. I don't need a second strike. One time's all I need. That's all I need. Just give me one shot, and this whole thing is over. We're living high on the hog. David learned his lesson, though. Look at this. David says to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Now he understood that when he was in the cave, but watch this. Here's where David learned. And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him. What happened to Nabal? The Lord struck him. David learned. Or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. The Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But now, take the spear that is at his head and the jar of water and let us go. So, we're taking something because we're going to show him in a minute that we were here. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head and then went away. Notice that he told Abishai to take the spear, but it says David took the spear. I believe that Abishai is the one that actually took it, but the narrative is David's the one that's in possession of it. Whether it's in David's hand or not, David is in possession of the spear, which signifies the kingship. So he took the spear and the jar of water, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did anyone awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. Verse 13. So I'll read this next paragraph. Then David went over to the other side and stood far off at the top of the hill, with a great space between them. And David called to the army and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, will you not answer, Abner? Then Abner answered, who are you who calls to the king? And David said, Abner, are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came to destroy the king, your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head. So David goes back, and he's a little bit miffed here at Abner. Hey, you're supposed to be watching out. You know, it's one thing when Saul went into the cave by himself. It's one thing that I was able to sneak up behind him and cut off a piece of his robe. It's a whole different thing for me to be able to go into the middle of your camp and take stuff with him. And no, there was a man, not David, but notice that he said there was one man. There was a man that went in there to kill Saul, but it wasn't David. And he also says to Abner, are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? So Abner was a great warrior, but he didn't do his job. You deserve to die for this. You allowed somebody to get that close to the king. Verse 17, Saul recognized David's voice and said, is this your voice, my son David? And David said, it is my voice, my lord, O king. And he said, why does my lord pursue after his servant? If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should not have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Now therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth, away from the presence of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. So again, as last time, Saul recognized David's voice, this term of endearment toward David. Is that you, my son? And David is still searching for the reason. David thinks that there is some reason that he can reason with Saul. Why have you come out? And he says, look, if the Lord has called you out against me, then let the Lord show mercy to me. I'll present an offering to the Lord, and may he enjoy my offering and grant me grace and forgiveness. But if it's a man who's saying these things to you about me, then let him be cursed of God. He says that they have driven, and see, really, he's saying these things against Saul. Look what he says. If a man has done this, let them be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord. So because of these actions of Saul, David's not able to go to the temple. David's not able to enjoy his inheritance of his property from his father. That's his land and his right as an Israelite to go to the temple. David's not able to do that. He says, they say basically, go serve other gods, as if they were saying, you have no share in the God of Israel now. Those are fighting words for David. Now therefore let not my blood fall to the earth far away from the presence of the Lord. Hey, when I die, I don't want to die over here. I want to die in Jerusalem. Well, Jerusalem's not the capital yet, but I want to die within the land of Israel. And he says, basically, you're searching, you're the king, and you're searching after somebody who has really no value. I'm as if I were a flea. Then verse 21, then Saul said, I have sinned. Saul's beginning to see things clearly at times. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes today. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake. And David answered and said, here is the spear, O king. Let one of your young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. So Saul acknowledges his sin and tells David, come on back. David's not coming back. He's been there. He's seen it. He knows Saul goes from 0 to 100 and back to 0. Right? We've mentioned before this. Most likely Saul is bipolar. He is all over the place. You know, he goes from, laughter and joy to tears, from anger to sorrow. He does not have control of his emotions. And look at now, David has the spear. He has the sign of the king in his hand. But he's not going to take it. He tells him, where am I at here? I lost my place. Here we go, verse 22. And David answered and said, here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. Not a bunch of them. What am I at on time? Ooh, I'm a minute over. Sorry about that. He says, I will not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. So, where are we at? Will we have patience and allow the Lord to work? Whether it's in a struggle, whether somebody has wronged us, how will we respond? David gives us a great example of faith. David was in a place to take action. Many of us would have said, just like they did, the Lord has put him into your hand. Take action. David was smarter than that. Let us be smarter and respond in faith. Wait upon the Lord. It's not easy. Boy, there's a friend of mine that I really wish would hear this. He's going to hear it a couple weeks from now, because I teach him at another place. He's telling me, I'm sick of this being a Christian, man. It's just like it's one struggle after another after another. Yep. trying to teach him to, yes, we're out here and there's struggles and there's difficulty, but you've got to be able to step back and find your contentment in the Lord, as David does. Yes, life is tore up at times, but when we have that relationship with God and we're sure in Him, and our faith is strong in Him, not in the circumstance, because the circumstances are all over the place. If we're looking to see if God's favor is on us because we're doing good, we're looking at the wrong thing. We need to look to the Word of God and see, what does God say about us? He says we're forgiven. He says that we have a future with Him. That's what He says. We can step back into the Word of God, into our faith with God, and know we have a place with Him. So regardless of what's going on out here, we have contentment in Him. I apologize for going over.
No, keep going.
Some people have kids to pick up.
Just give him another cookie.
Heavenly Father, Lord, we love you. Can you shut that, please? We thank you for your tenderness.